everyone. I welcome you to CEC lecture series. I'm Nupur Chawla and I teach English literature at Maitre College, Delhi University. Today's lecture is part of the ongoing series on the English short story, and it is second part of the lecture titled James Joyce, The Dead in Dubliners. In the first part of the lecture, we discussed the intellectual background of James Joyce, how he is a writer belonging to the modernist movement, and then we also discussed how the short story collection, which is in discussion today, that is Dubliners, departs from a very conventionally modernist text. And in particular, our discussion is going to center around the last story of this collection, that is titled The Dead. Now, there are some of the features that we had listed in the previous lecture, and we're going to talk about them at length in this one. The first thing that we said was that the characters in the story, they reflect the Irish citizens, right? So Joyce, his idea was to bring alive Ireland in the early 20th century, the kind of people that lived there, the way society was constituted, the issues that they dealt with, the thoughts that they had. So we see that characters then actually reflect different kinds of people that one would find in Ireland at that point of time. Next, the story also reveals people's preoccupations, which means what were they thinking about? What were people feeling at that point of time? What is it that was constantly in discussion amongst them? All these points are revealed through the narrative of Joyce. His views about the country are also known in this short story. As we said that Dublin, or the city of Dublin, becomes almost a character. That's the level of engagement that Joyce has with Dublin. And what he thinks about the country, his ideas about his country are also known in this story. The fifth thing that we say are that the women characters in this text, they really stand out as modern. And when we say modern, what does it mean? They are forward-looking, they are secular, they are educated, they are not bogged down by traditional expectations, they are assertive. So the way he models these characters says a lot about the Irish society of the time and also the vision of Joyce for his own country. And lastly, having looked at all these aspects of the Irish society, the story also presents a view on love, right? And a very beautiful one at that. So that way one can say that in this story there's lots for us to know. We come very close and face to face with Ireland. It in fact feels like you visited that country just by reading this text. Next, what we say is that let's look at the context of the narrative. So the story is actually set in the living room of two middle-aged Irish women that are living together with their niece. It is the evening of a ball or a party or a dance party hosted by them. And the story spans this one evening, right? So the entire story comprises action which takes place only in this one evening. And what is that evening? That the two Irish women who are living together, they are middle-aged, they also have their niece living with them. They organize this party at their house. And one can say then that this is a very important trope which was also explored by 19th century writers as well, You see, any kind of such an event, for example, a ball, which used to be very, very common in 19th century fiction as well, becomes then one of the ways for the author to really, introduce a variety of characters to us. Because that is a setting which would have a lot of people coming in, and thereby the reader gets acquainted with different kinds of people of the society that's being represented, right? The other thing that we also need to notice about the context is that these two middle-aged women are living by themselves, right? This in itself is a marked observation on women. They are pretty self-independent. I mean, self-dependent, right? In that age, living life by themselves, organizing such social gatherings, and very successful ones, goes on to say a lot about the agency that women had in society of the time, right? Now, having looked at the context, let's look at the characters that are there in the story. First is Miss Kate and Miss Julie. Now, these two, Miss Julia, these two are the middle-aged sisters, and they're also musicians. Their niece is called Mary Jane, and she also is learned in music. They have a house help or the housemaid who's called Lily. Then we have Gabriel, the nephew, who teaches English literature and also is a columnist of a newspaper. Greta is Gabriel's wife. Freddie Malins, he is a man who is habituated to drinking. Then we have Miss Ivers, who is a young, feisty woman. And then there are still other guests. Because if we start to list out all the characters, it is going to take a lot of time. But these characters are the ones who really pervade the narrative. While the others, they are present, but present for the sake of also making us aware of the social fabric of the times. Now you see, one thing that we notice, that both the middle-aged Irish women, they are musicians. Their niece is a musician. Their nephew is a columnist and teaches English literature. And what did we say? That Joyce depicts the middle class or the Irish middle class. So looking at their occupations, one sees that it's a society which is kind of steeped in the culture of art and is an educated one, right? So we're going to, of course, talk at length about this in a while, but let's first discuss the first point, that how women in this story, they are modern, they're independent-minded, they're assertive, and they're also educated. Now, how do we see that? We will just now discuss in a bit. But the story opens with the housemaid trying her best to make the guests comfortable who have arrived for the party. The two hosts, the women, are busy getting ready, and people are gathering in their house for an evening of dance and conversations, right? So this story then presents to us nothing but conversations between characters. They are all talking to one another at this party, and it is through these conversations that all these issues come to the fore. We understand the kind of society that Ireland had at that point of time, and also other understanding about issues prevalent. Now you see, we said that we will begin by talking about women. Now Gabriel, who's the nephew of the two women who have hosted the evening, he is one of the central characters in the text. He is the one who was also one of the most awaited guests at the ball. As he comes, his initial conversation with the caretaker, that is Lily, says a lot about the way women are presented by Joyce. So he asks Lily that, so you must be going to school. But Lily responds that no, my education is complete, school is over for me. And the next thing that he says was, great, now that school is over for you, so we must, we must have an opportunity to come to your wedding sometime soon, right? All this is the backdrop of the conversation between Lily and Gabriel. Now, the moment he mentions these two things, Lily's response over here is actually very important. And I quote, the narrator says, the girl glanced back at him over her shoulder and said with great bitterness, the men, that is now only all palaver and what they can draw out of you, unquote. What does it mean? She says, now what does the word palaver mean? Palaver means, a long extensive discussion on something. She says, men, that's all that all the conversations are now going to be about. And that's all that they can draw out of you. So what do we see here? She says this with a lot of bitterness. So if a woman is educated, if she has finished her education, what is the next obvious thing that people say socially? When are you getting married? And Lily, even as she's a housemaid, she contests this and she gets irritated with this thought. So her irritation or her bitterness at this tells us a lot about how women think in Irish society at that time. Maybe she wants to imagine a life beyond just getting married and settling down with a man. Or maybe she is just perturbed at how the society itself limits women in their expectations, in its expectations of them, right? And what's also important is that she, expresses this thought of hers in no uncertain terms, to the extent that Gabriel is kind of taken aback, and that's what the narrator says. And I quote, Gabriel colored as if he felt he had made a mistake, unquote. So he felt that as if he had made a mistake by telling Lily that, all right, now that your education is done, you must get married. So you see, in fact, in the story, Gabriel is taken aback on two accounts by two different women who are very, very assertive. So you see, the way these women talk tells us a lot about their psyche, their aspirations, and how they conduct themselves in the early 20th century Ireland, right? Another encounter that Gabriel has is with Miss Ivers. She too challenges Gabriel. And I quote, she says, well, I'm ashamed of you. To say you would write for a paper like that, I didn't think you were a West Briton, unquote. Now, what do we see over here? Miss Ivers is a young, feisty woman who is meeting Gabriel at the party, and the very first thing that she says to him is that I'm ashamed of you, that you are writing for such a paper, which means that she clearly has or forms an opinion of Gabriel on the basis of the newspaper that he writes for, right? So he's otherwise a professor of literature, but he contributes to the column of the newspaper every week. And she uses very strong words. I'm ashamed of you that you write for a paper like that. I did not think that you were a West Briton. So which means West Briton also indicates, and clearly she is taking a political stand, right? For her, perhaps the ideology of the newspaper that Gabriel is working for doesn't agree with her, and she expresses this in no uncertain terms. So once again, what do we see? Two things. The woman is not only educated, but at the same time, she has an opinion. She's aware about the political climate, she's aware about the political debates, and she has a view on it. That a newspaper which maybe carries a certain kind of opinions, she doesn't agree with that. And the second thing is that she does not mince words when it comes to expressing her disapproval, right? So yet again, just like Lily, even Miss Ivers, in a way, unnerves Gabriel for a bit. And your narrator says in the story, and I quote, "He did not know how to meet her charge," unquote. Charge again of what? Of working with a particular kind of a newspaper that had a particular political affiliation. So once again, Gabriel is put in the dock by a woman who's incredibly assertive. A third thing that we also say is that Gabriel's mother, her portrait, her photograph is seen on the wall. She's no more, but her photograph also tells us a lot about what women were like in the 20th century Ireland, right? So one, we have Miss Ivory, Miss Ivers, then we have Lily, who are both assertive, educated, and who speak their mind in no uncertain terms. They have an opinion. Likewise, Gabriel's mother's a portrait also is quite suggestive in that sense. The narrator says, and I quote, "Her photograph stood before the pier glass. She held an open book on her knees," unquote. So you see, Gabriel himself is a young man, right? And his mother, who's no more, in her picture, in her portrait, she's seen with an open book on her knees. Now you see, this visual or this image itself says a lot about women's preoccupation in that time. They're not seen with needles and knitting equipment. They're seen with a book, which again is quite a comment on how women were engaging in intellectual activity. They were involved with arts. Gabriel's aunts, who were also the organizers of the party, they are musicians. His own mother would read. So it's one can say, as a reader, it really is heartening to see these details carved out by Joyce in his women characters. A fourth thing that we also see about women in the story is that they also do not, while they're educated, they think for themselves, they engage in reading, they engage with arts. At the same time, women are shown to also have an open thinking mind. They critically respond to the figures of authority in society as well. They do not mere accept authority lying down. And one such instance is of Aunt Kate, one of the two organizers of the ball. When she is discussing about how her own sister was not allowed to, continue in the choir, continue singing in the choir. So over there, she makes a remark about the Pope. And let's see what she says. And I quote, she says, "I know all about the honor of God, but I think it's not at all honorable for the Pope to turn out women out of choirs," unquote. Again, which means what? That women, are being treated a certain way by the religious authority, but Aunt Kate does not think twice before questioning that. So that's how we see that, women characters, they have shades which are indeed of a modern woman that's thinking for herself, that's questioning, that's critical. The next point that we notice in the story is that an engagement with art is an important part of the Irish life. The narrator tells us that the niece of the two middle-aged Irish women also is, well versed in piano, and she is seen playing piano in the story on a lot of occasions. The narrator says Mary Jane was playing her academy piece, full of runs and difficult passages, to the hushed drawing room, unquote. Which means what? That Jane was playing the piano so beautifully, and a piece which was quite complex, but everyone was sitting with rapt attention. So what do we see here? That art is a very important part of Irish life. Piano, we see different people play piano through the course of the evening. They enjoy music, they relish music, they discuss music, right? And that's why elsewhere in the text, the narrator also mentions, and I quote, "The subject of the talk was the opera company which was then at the Theatre Royal," unquote. So you see, even the conversations, their topics surround music and art. So that's how, even as the story covers one evening, but it tells us a lot about the society of the time. Next, third point we see is that people's sentiment about their country, that is Ireland, is also made available in the text. Gabriel tells Miss Ivers. Miss Ivers asks him to come for a holiday in West Ireland, and Gabriel remarks, I quote, "I'm sick of my country," unquote, and he wishes to spend holiday in other parts of Europe instead. At another point in the story, he says, and I quote, "I feel more strongly with every passing year that our country has no tradition which does it so much honor and which it should guard so jealously as that of its hospitality," unquote. So he says, I feel that there is no tradition in our country. While it feels quite honorable for its tradition, just like the Irish take pride in their hospitality, but he says, I feel that there is nothing great about the tradition that our country, Ireland, has. So we see that, there's some kind of a criticism or cynicism that the author has towards the country. I wouldn't call it cynicism, but definitely at a time when Irish nationalism was really at its head, James Joyce was rethinking, about his country. He wasn't entirely convinced. And the central character Gabriel's remarks in his conversations about the country indicate that. And the last and a very important point that the story makes is about love. That how it is a very deeply felt emotion and its vagaries as well. Now Gabriel is present at the party along with his wife, right? And once the party comes to an end and everyone is headed back home, the party which spans the entire narrative is nothing but a mixture of conversations between people, right? That's all that the story captures. So when those conversations end and everyone is headed back home, Gabriel is overcome with a very sweet emotion for his wife when he observes her. And he says something, and I quote, the narrator says, he had felt proud and happy then, happy that she was his, proud of her grace and wifely carriage, unquote. So you see, her wifely carriage and her grace made Gabriel proud. He keeps on thinking about his wife even as they have spent so much time together. But in that moment, he is, he recalls all that they have shared throughout their life, and he feels some very tender emotions towards her. But later on, as they reach home, his wife confesses something. She says that I have been thinking of this man that used to play the song, and that song is what she also heard at the party. So that song reminded her of this young man that used to be really fond of her when she was a young woman before moving to Dublin. And she has not been able to forget that man. And this realization, when she shares with her husband who's been doting on her, comes as a rude shock. And he says, and I quote, "So she had that romance in her life. A man had died for her sake. It hardly pained him now to think how poor a part he, her husband, had played in her life. He watched her while she slept, as though he and she had never lived together as man and wife." He was heartbroken. All of a sudden, he feels a sense of loss. So what Joyce is saying, that with deep love also comes a deep sense of loss, right? But how does he conclude? This last quote is very beautiful. He says, and I quote, "Better pass boldly into that other world in the full glory of some passion than fade and wither dismally with age." Generous tears filled Gabriel's eyes. He knew that such a feeling must be love, unquote. So even as he figures that his own wife is thinking about some other man who is dead, who's no longer there, and he occupies her thoughts, but at the same time, he continues to love her for who she is. And he says, because there is glory in, dying with full passion instead of dying of age. So while there is loss, while there is shock, while there is, different vagaries in love, but James Joyce doesn't leave hope. And he says a lot about this very beautiful emotion in the story. So with that, I will leave you with some more thoughts to think about all these points that are raised by Joyce in his text, and I'm sure that it will, urge you to read other stories from this collection and understand Joyce's craft. Thank you.